In this episode of Gear Club, we talk with Jorma Kaukonen, electric guitarist extraordinaire for the Jefferson Airplane, blues picker for Hot Tuna, prolific solo artist, and all-around great guy. At 81 years young, Jorma is still writing, teaching, and gigging with no signs of slowing down. John and Stuart talk with Jorma about his early career playing Bay Area clubs with Janis Joplin, life in the airplane, his guitar mentors, speed skating, touring, and teaching guitar at his Fur Peace Ranch in Ohio.
Jorma!
Well, here I am. Thanks for giving a gosh darn.
When we realized we were going to get you, Jorma, I had this recollection of a story. 1974, I was in college and I got a job working at a radio station as an assistant to this DJ who was only on at midnight playing old blues, right? And I kept bringing in records for him to play and he wouldn't let me play any of them. Finally, I show up and I say, I want you to hear something. I play him this record and he goes, whoa. He goes, let's play that. And it was the first song from Qua, Genesis.
Yeah.
And this guy was only playing Blind Blake. He was really one of these Luddites who was only going to play that. And I played him this and I fooled him. Because I kept bringing in records, I was bringing in American Beauty, Working Man's Dead, acoustic stuff. And when Qua came out, it was, to me, a radical change in the landscape of what I was listening to. Was that your first solo record?
Yes, it was.
You were primarily known to myself and all of us as a masterful electric guitar player. And then all of a sudden, there's this incredible old acoustic music. Where did it come from? Did that start before you were playing electric music?
Oh, I started at 15 years before I ever played electric music. The whole story, it's hard in this day and age, it's really hard to do anything new or to discover anything new. But, when I started out playing fingerstyle stuff in 1960, I only listened to 2 records for about a year and a half. End of story. And that's all I focused on, because that's all I had. Actually, I can't take credit for it, but now today, kids are buried under all this stuff. When my daughter, who can also read, wants to do a Billy Joel song, she gets the sheet music and looks at a YouTube thing, and a couple hours later, she plays and sings the song. It's ridiculous,
Yeah.
Right. So, Jorma, what were the 2 records?
Great question. So the first one was Harlem Street Singer. That was that Reverend Davis thing. That was part of that 4-record thing that came out on Prestige Bluesville. It was recorded by Rudy Van Gelder up there in Englewood, New Jersey.
Wow,
but at that time, there was only one out. It was the Harlem Street. There was that. And then there was the Riverside record with Pink Anderson on one side and Reverend Davis on the other. Wow. And the third, to a lesser degree, was a 10-inch Folkways LP of Brownie McGee, but without Sonny Terry, just Brownie McGee. 8 songs. Wow. Fantastic stuff.
So you had learned fingerstyle before you were playing electric guitar?
Yeah, so, like so many people, when I was in high school, playing guitar was not the incredibly cool thing that we all find it to be today. Wow. The incredibly cool thing was like drums, piano, sax, and there was a couple of us that played guitar. We were the weird kids, and that's just how it was back then. But when I was at Antioch College in 1960, like my friend said, you're going to that Pinko free love school in the Midwest? And I went, yeah, you bet. And there was a lot of Pinko free love characters from New York City who were in and out of the Antioch system. And one of them was this guy, Ian Buchanan. He had sort of a tragic story, but he was a really great player. And he was a buddy of Reverend Davis's. So I found my second quarter on campus, I found myself in a house with this guy. And I theorized, even though we never had this conversation, that he elected to patiently teach me how to do this because my playing was just so irritating to him. that was my thought. And so he introduced me to the Reverend. And later on, when I had a co-op job in Manhattan, he actually physically introduced me to the Reverend too. But, and that music, it's my sort of like isolationist, point of view. Like I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't join stuff, It's just the fact that you could, as you guys know, that you could pick up a guitar and play a complete piece without having 5 friends, one of whom owned a van, was like a big deal,
But when you picked up the electric guitar for all of a sudden what was one of the biggest bands on the planet, What was that like making that transition?
That's an interesting transitional thing. Obviously, when Jack and I were in high school, we had a band together, and yes, I had an electric guitar. But in those days, electric guitar was just an amplified guitar. We didn't know any of the feedback, all the stuff that we all take for granted today. So I don't really count that. But so Kantner got me into the Jefferson Airplane. Who even knows why? Except maybe he wanted an ally because we were buddies from San Jose. But all of a sudden we had to plug in and stuff like that. And I began to realize immediately, because people were starting to show up, electric guitar players were making a lot of waves back then. And the first one that really, I mean, Buddy Guy has always been monumental to me and still is in a lot of ways. But the guy that really set me on fire was Mike Bloomfield. So imagine, I had an electric guitar with the Airplane, and I started out with a Rickenbacker 12-string. Hey, it was the 60s in my defense.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say electric sitar.
No, I've owned many instruments I can't play, and the sitar is one of them. But anyway, so all of a sudden, we started out, and basically it was still an electric guitar. But then the Butterfield Blues Band came out with that record, East West, and they were touring in San Francisco. And when they first came to play the Fillmore, for some unknown reason, my ex-wife and I had a 2-room, 3rd-floor walk-up on to visit Arrow Street, and Graham asked if we could let Mike Bloomfield, his wife, stay over with us for a couple of days. Of course, we said sure. So anyway, here's this guy that I'd been listening to on records, and I'd seen him live a couple of times, and to me, what he was doing with the guitar back then, and nobody had pedals then, this was pre all that kind of stuff, but, he was playing a twin, full open, and all that kind of stuff, and it was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I remember around a little after that, when Harvey Mandel came to time, people would go, "You got to hear Harvey play." It wasn't about his music. He can sustain a note for 20 seconds, So Michael, here we are sharing this little tiny apartment, and Michael took it upon himself to show me some electric guitar tricks, many of which I use to these days. Now, in those days, it was also pre-custom gauge strings. So you might buy a set of heavy gauge and a set of lighter gauge and mix them up, et cetera, et cetera. So Michael showed me that if you're bending a string and you want it to be pitch specific, especially in an era when a lot of guys were still playing wound thirds, to use 3 fingers in that one string instead of 1, because it gave you a lot of control, so you could actually control the pitch of the string. And a lot of times, I obviously wouldn't do that playing acoustic guitar because I use all my other fingers for different stuff. But I do when I play electric guitar. And as a result, we were joking about it the other day, I could still accurately bend the 4 frets, 2 whole tones, and have it be in pitch.
Wow.
Wow. That's amazing.
Who knows how long that's going to last. But anyway, so Michael showed me that. And the other thing was, if you're putting a little bit of grease on the string like that, to use this part of your palm as a fulcrum on the neck of the guitar, and you're actually using, if you can see, you're actually using your whole elbow and pivoting these fingers to bend those notes. I mean, everybody does this a lot of different ways. So Michael just got me all fired up, and that East West album, that Butterfield Blues Band of those days, that was an incredible show. There's kids today that can do that kind of stuff in their sleep, but back then it was magic.
So, but at what point did you start getting into using pedals and stuff like that? Was that in the Airplane or?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, absolutely. So there were no overdrive pedals then. So you look at stuff. I mean, we're guitar players. And when you plug in an electric guitar, all of a sudden there's a wealth of possibilities. And we'll talk about some of the Eventide stuff later because that's a whole other universe.
Yeah.
But in any case, so one of the first pedals that I got was that Gibson. Their Fuzz Tone was a pedal that had the cable built into it. And of course, as soon as I heard Cream, I had to get a Vox Crybaby. And I still have 4 of them. The 1965 Thomas Organ Company pedals that Analog Man went through for me, so they were great. I had 5, but I gave one to Susan Tedeschi because I figured I don't need 5, and she'd probably get a kick out of it. So those were the 2 pedals that I used for a while. And then, of course, after that, things began happening, and now we all use lots of that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. It's like I always say, pedals, right now, pedals and hot sauces are out of control. Everybody's making hot sauces. Everybody's making pedals.
Yeah.
And you could just get immersed with this stuff. I mean.
Yeah, you really can. And actually, that's a great metaphor, and I'm going to use it myself, too, because I like it.
It's all yours.
I know some interesting guitar players that don't use pedals that can make all those noises with their hands and stuff like that. But it's not the 1990s anymore. And there's a lot of really great stuff out there. That being said, imagine if you develop an incredible thing, whatever your thing is, but it's predicated on having these pedals that actually work all the time. Because as we know, they don't always work all the time.
Right.
So that means you have to have at least two of everyone. But once again, you know, I mean, it's easy to be wise ass and be critical of that kind of stuff, but it's foolish because it really gives us a larger palette of colors and stuff to do whatever it is that you want to do.
I have about 5 Electro-Harmonix Holy Grail pedals, which are like a spring reverb simulator.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the reason I've stockpiled them is because it's a chip in there, and it does sound really good for a lot of things. But once the chip is gone, the pedal's gone. So I have found a bunch of them, and it's the original release. But it's the same thing with you and the pedals that you have, like having 4 or 5. I mean, I feel like I use it so much that once it blows up, I can't.
I totally understand. Yeah. Speaking of Electro-Harmonix, I'm really fond of their Mini Qtron.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've been touring with, you know, over the last couple of years with Rob Ikes and Trey Hensley, and Trey was using the Mini Qtron on his acoustic guitar. I said, "What is that thing?" You know, so he told me. So of course I had to buy one immediately. One of the things that I like to do, like when I don't use that many pedals, but I've got my go-to pedals also. So one of the things that I like to do is I have one of Alfonso Hermano's Zen drives. Actually, I've got a bunch of the ones that when he was still making them himself. That's always my first pedal in line before the wah, before anything. So to send a nice overdriven signal into the Mini Qtron and have it set up so that when you just make a sound or strum a cluster of notes or whatever, and it cascades down the envelopes, it does unpredictable things. And I'm really fond of that.
That's great.
It takes the right song to be unpredictable, but you know.
Right.
Just in terms of your relationship to electric guitar now, what's interesting to me is when I hear you play electric guitar, at least Hot Tuna, the Airplane, and then I hear you play acoustic guitar, you sound almost like 2 different guitar players. Like like your approach is very specific to the instrument. It's not just you pick up and play the same stuff on both guitars. So do you have, like, what's your current relationship to the electric guitar now? Is it?
You know, it's really funny because my wife and I are downsizing. We're getting a smaller house and all this stuff. And I'm looking at stuff that I need to get rid of. You know, I don't need to have 3 Les Pauls anymore. 1 is more than enough, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of sound kind of things, when I go back in time to when I started playing with the Airplane, you've got to realize that I came in with no electric guitar skills whatsoever. And so I was influenced by people that I like. But the other thing is the Jefferson Airplane, as you guys know, it's not a normal rock and roll, but it is in some ways, but it's not in other ways. And one of the ways is when you think of the songwriters that we have and the kind of stuff that they wrote. Like I was doing a class last week, and I was playing We Can Be Together from Volunteers. That song's got 7 distinct parts to it, you know. I would never write a song like that today, and most bands I don't think would. So there's a challenge to do a lot of stuff. Well, by that time I'd already started to develop a thing. But back in the beginning, you know, I didn't have any of those skills that all of us that play that guitar take for granted, you know, sustaining, all that stuff. It was all new. But I listen to a lot of music because my dad was in the service. I've lived a lot of places. Did you learn sitar? Did you learn all this stuff? And the answer, no, I didn't. But I've listened to a lot of stuff over the years. And so without being able to actually put it into words or to write it down, there's just kind of stuff that I like to go to. So if you're playing blues, that gives you kind of a format that you more or less have to fit into, unless it's an odd kind of a format. But when you're playing, you know, pop-ish music, or whatever you want to call it, what the Jefferson Airplane did, where you have, you know, Grace, when she was writing in that Volunteers period, she was in Eric Satie, so a lot of her, it's just weird shit, you know. So what are you going to do? You're going to play something that pleases your ears when you play it. Like that Jesse Ed Davis quote. How do you come up with that stuff? I play the notes that sound good. So I think most of us try to play the notes that sound good.
Right.
And again, I had this incredible, huge palette to pick stuff from. Had I been in a blues band, I'm sure I would have had just as much fun, but I wouldn't have known as much interesting stuff. To get back to your thing about the acoustic and the electric guitar, it's apples and oranges, but it is and it isn't. When I think about stuff that I'm working on the acoustic guitar, for the most part, I'm trying to figure out some sort of a complete thing, so it's a piece. when I get to, one of the things I love to do is to play with other people. So I'm not driving the bus. So I have to come up with stuff that fits with whatever they're doing. That's challenging and that's fun. And when that happens, I'm going to mess around with stuff. I mean, you know, if it's a blues-esque thing, obviously I'm going to go to we all have our go-to stuff, and I'll do that too. But if it's something that's got a lot of nice major melodic changes, or a completely minor song that's not in that's not genre ridden, you know, then I'm just listening for textures. And with that in mind also, I'm listening for textures with whatever the gear gives me. You know, all of us have come to a point where we can pretty much afford anything we gosh darn well want, you know. But of all the stuff that you own, how much stuff do you use all the time? I remember when the Eventide's phase shifter that I had back in the day, single rack space thing, and then of course the harmony that nobody like me could understand in a million years, you know, and all this really neat stuff, you know. And so for a guy like me, like I got like the Black Hole thing, I did some overdubs on something that I'm working on for a project that who knows what will come out, but I got some interesting sounds. I love the sound of that thing. But I couldn't see myself being able to do it on stage because there's just too much shit to think about, you know. Right. I would want to have a tech guy. Like when I did this, my Justin Whip, the guy that plays drums for us in Hot Tuna, but he's Larry Campbell's production partner.
Nice.
I'm playing and he's messing around with the pedal and it sounds great. I mean, it was definitely a tandem effort with that kind of thing. But I loved all those sounds. But when I get out, when I'm actually playing, it upsets me to have to think about too much stuff.
Right.
Now, if I had taken the tutorial where I knew how to actually save stuff and put them into a bank of presets, it probably would take a burden off me. But the other thing, too, is, I mean, you know, when we're playing live electric music, we're given a lot of things that we can play with, and one of them is a great sounding room. One of the things I noticed with something like that Electro Harmonix Mini Qtron, in my opinion, is it's room sensitive. It might sound great in one room, and the next night you try the same settings, it sounds horrible.
Interesting.
I mean, I think that if the guitar and the gadget feel the space and respond to it in some real way, either that or I'm having a flashback. I'm not sure.
Maybe both. Maybe a little both.
It could be.
So, I mean, we only have limited time, and I could talk about your career for hours and hours and hours because we're such big fans. But one thing, and I'm going to go back to Qua one more time. One thing that occurred to me when I heard was, I don't remember you singing this in the Airplane. I mean, you had 3 front singers,
correct,
but it was the first time I really thought that I heard you singing A and B. And I know you wrote songs for the Airplane, but all of a sudden the lyrics started. To me, it was like a whole different. It was so lyrical and so poetic. Yeah. And had you been doing that all along, or did it just?
You know, that's another one of the interesting things too. You know, we always joke about the drummer's last day in the band when he asked to do his songs. That old gag. You know, the Jefferson Airplane was an interesting animal in a lot of ways, and you know, with 3 great singers and songwriters. You would think it would have been impossible for somebody who'd never written a song with lyrics to do something. But Marty and Paul and Grace always encouraged me to do stuff. And I wasn't a prolific writer. I mean, over the years, I've written a lot of songs, but I don't consider myself a tunesmith because I don't just crank them out. But anytime I came up with something, I got it on the record. And so I got the most incredible on-the-job training that any young musician could possibly get. You know, to be encouraged by a band that had 3 fantastic writers and singers that had a record. You know, having a record deal it's a different ballgame today, but back then it was like, you know, the holy grail. You know, being able to record something for a major label, I mean, it was just, for a guy like me, it's like, how could this have possibly happened, you know?
That's amazing. Yeah, it was so different. I can only imagine just even with budgets and how much time you got to spend in the studio. Sure. And it was, I even know from like 1980, I just remember the recording the 6-month record in London, whereas unless you're somebody in the really top echelon now, that doesn't happen anymore, even on majors.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware of that program, Ableton Live.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, my daughter's into that stuff, and she, you know, she could record an album on this that could blow away a lot of not so great studio albums back in the 60s. It's ridiculous, unbelievable.
Right.
However, that being said, think about, you know, some of the great producers that a guy like me has been able to work with. You know, Rick Gerard who did Surrealistic Pillow. That's a pop rock record in a lot of ways, but it's very well produced. And all the other stuff we did after that with Al Schmidt producing, you know.
Right.
I mean, because Al Schmidt had golden ears, and, you know, he and I stayed friends up to the day that he died. And his ability with mic placement was gold.
It's funny. He once told me he got dosed doing a live show of the airplanes. He was doing a remote somewhere, and he got dosed. And he said it was one of the best nights of his life.
Right. You know, that's some funny shit, really. You know, yeah, he did. And to his credit, he didn't bat an eye. Right.
Speaking of all this stuff, on top of these amazing records you guys were making, revolutionary records, it was a cultural phenomena going on. Sure. It wasn't just a bunch of kids like John and I coming home and, you know, putting on their headphones, smoking a joint and loving it. It was really connected to something that was happening. And well, what was that like to live through? I mean,
well, here's the way I look at it, you know, this many years down the road. It could have been you guys. You could have been that bunch of kids, but it was a real zeitgeist. You know, everything that happened in San Francisco at that time with the cultural stuff that was happening. I mean, I talk to you know, I've got a 25-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter. We talk about this stuff, you know, and I go, look, you guys are going to have your time, and it'll be your time.
Right.
But I had a pretty exciting time when I
oh my God,
a little bit older, no question about it. But I mean, there's just so much stuff happening, and we just happened to be there. Now, you know, chemistry is everything, as you guys know. You know, I wound up with a really interesting bunch of bandmates. I mean, we had a major record deal within the first 6 months we were together. How often does that happen?
Yeah.
In any era?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous, you know. I mean, San Francisco, well, I was joking about it with one of my friends. We moved to San Francisco. Well, we lived in the Bay Area, but it was a cheap place to live. A lot of artists there. I doubt there's any resident artist that lives in San Francisco today because you can't afford it. They've gone somewhere else. I don't know where it is, but I'm sure there's somewhere else. But we just got lucky, and a lot of stuff happened in that time. And when you consider that, even though I got my degree in sociology, I'm not going to fall back on that here. But I mean, think about all the stuff that was going on, you know, and we actually had a group identity also. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I don't see the kids that are my age today that I was back then having that group identity to fall back on like we did. You know, we kind of always had a team at our back, even before Woodstock.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing.
When an album like Volunteers came out, it was a direct political statement. And that, I'm not sure that has happened since, quite honestly, in the same way. At least maybe.
I agree. I mean, what we're doing, I was just talking about the other day, because every now and then, everybody's, myself included, are always an expert on everything, but they're talking about, I mean, the Volunteers, listen to the lyrics, how sophomoric, etc. I go, look, first of all, it's a different time. And secondly, nobody said Up Against the Wall, motherfucker, with more loving, beautiful harmony than Grace and the guys did back then. And I only say that half as a joke because, in the language at the time, none of us were putting anybody up against the wall, and we know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But it meant something back then. Now, coming out of left field today for somebody that wasn't part of that world and listening to that, all they hear is the words. And the words are very confrontational, which, of course, I'm sure Grace intended in every possible sense, but anyhow, yeah.
Well, here's another one. You played with Janis Joplin in the early 60s.
Sure, yeah. That's another one of these just synchronicity and confluence, And speaking of that, there's some Janis stuff coming out that I played with her, recorded back then. They're doing a special edition that's coming out, et cetera, et cetera. Oh. Anyway, so the Bay Area, I mean, I'm sure you guys have been out there, but it was a very small community back then. When I moved to San Francisco in 1962, there were no buildings taller than 8 stories because they couldn't earthquake-proof them back then. Just a simpler time. And the musical community, they were divided sort of geographically. There was like the South Bay, where I lived, the San Jose, Santa Clara. Then Garcia had the Palo Alto, the Mid-Peninsula stuff. And then Tom Hobson, a bunch of Billy Roberts, a bunch of other guys that were up in San Francisco. And then there was the Berkeley contingent, And everybody kind of had their identity. But when they got together, everybody played together. there wasn't a whole lot of swinging dick stuff, and you know what I'm talking about. And and so it was a very, very open community. And that being said, also, San Francisco being the small town that it was back then, in the scene, however you wanted to look at the scene, it wasn't just musicians. It was like artists and poets. But anyway, to get to the Janis thing, I wound up at the University of Santa Clara. The year that I went in there was the first year they were co-ed. I had already lived on my own in New York. I actually had relationships with adult women by that time, you know. The upperclassmen that were there were pissed because there were women at school. I kept thinking, have you guys lost your mind? And so anyway, so I'm walking around. I'm definitely one of the two weirdest people on campus. And there was a little flyer. There's about a hootenanny. So I went to that hootenanny, which was the folk theater, which became the Offstage later. And I get in there, and Janis was there. Now, back in those days, you know, I don't go to open mics, but a lot of my younger friends do. You sign in. If you're lucky, you'll get to go on before 11:30. I mean, it's just a utterly humiliating experience. You've got to want to be heard just to hang in there at an open mic and actually get to play. But back then, well, first of all, there weren't that many people that played and hanging out, whatever, you know. You're probably, everybody's done by 10:30. In any case, the folk theater back then was a tiny, like a single width little shop. The stage was in the window. Your back was to the window. I doubt that it held more than 50 people, if it held that. So it was me, Janis, this guy, Steve Talbot. He actually played on one of the Hot Tuna records. It's a really incredibly authentic white blues singer who actually worked for the railroad, the Southern Pacific Railroad, which made it even better, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
In any case, so we're just sitting around and we're backstage and, hey, I'm so-and-so, you're so-and-so. And I had just moved to California from the New York area. And it became apparent to both me and Janis at that time that we're both sort of like living in the same area, the same, you know, artistic area. And even though I didn't know the songs she did, I knew the songs she did, you know. And we just started playing together. And Steve played some harmonica that night. There's tapes of this floating around. And, you know, Janis, when she, you know, back in those days, none of us had cars. So the 50 miles that it took to take the Greyhound from San Francisco to San Jose was an all-day event because it stopped every 20 feet, you know. So when Janis was up in North Beach and stuff like that, she had the guys that she would play with up there. And when she came down to San Jose, you know, that after I met her at that first night at the folk theater, at the Offstage rather, whatever she needed, somebody down the peninsula, I was that guy. But the thing is, like, I remember the first time I heard her, I was blown off my feet. And I realized she's the real deal. This is, you know, and to get to play with her, it's like something, you know, I'd been playing that long, maybe 2 years at that time. But I realized this is, you know, this may never happen to me again.
And did you maintain a friendship with her through the years? I mean,
you know, the Janis thing is interesting. And, you know, when PBS did that Little Girl Blues story about Janis, they interviewed me for hours, and I'm not in there at all. The reason is because Janis and I didn't do drugs together. We didn't have sex. Right. It was all about the music. So it's not as an interesting a story from that Little Girl Blues thing, you know. But like I said, I didn't know anything about her background, the drug problem she's going. I knew nothing about her whatsoever. I just knew that we got along good together. And so, and on those rare times when we got together, it was always about the music, and we always played and had a good time. Now, I joke about this a lot, and I'm only half joking about it. If I'd been managing her career, I would have kept her as a blues singer, not a rock and roll star. Mm. But hey, what do I know about anything, you know? But but we all of us who heard her realize that this is a very special woman, you know, a very special artist, and that's the deal, you know.
But did Big Brother and the Airplane do concerts together?
Oh yeah, but by that time she was a rock and roll singer. The other thing too is that one of the questions I get is they ask me, "Did you listen to this band? Were you into that?" And I go, "Look, you know, all of us, the Dead, the Airplane, Big Brother, we were all so wrapped up in our own careers that sure, if we had a chance to go see another band and we were happy to be in town, yeah, we did that. But the rest of the time we were rehearsing, writing, all that kind of stuff. You know, the real socializing, in my opinion, between the Bay Area artists really happened before we had careers."
Right, amazing.
That's amazing, yeah.
But then you guys played Woodstock, right?
Correct.
And did you play in the morning, if I recollect?
Yeah, that's right. That's another one of those, those classic stories. Yeah, my daughter was going a couple of years ago. She was going to a summer camp up there. We stopped by the museum. She looks at these pictures. Did you actually go out dressed like that? I'm going, sweetie, everybody dressed like that. That was the deal. We were supposed to headline the Saturday night, but of course, as we all know, one thing led to another. We went on Sunday morning.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
Do you recollect the sound on stage? Like, what were you guys hearing?
I can't say that I recollect the sound on stage. But if you think back to the way bands like The Airplane and The Dead, so Jack had a bunch of that Owsley Wall of Sound shit for his bass back then. And I was playing through Four Twins. In that era, sound systems were so shitty that usually the only thing in the PA would be drums and vocals. And so all these piles of amplifiers weren't just there to impress the audience. They were actually part of the sound system. So the answer is no, I don't really remember what it was like, but generally speaking, I do. And so I would have been able to, because Jack had speaker cabinets on both sides of the stage, as did Paul. My pile of stuff was right behind me, but so I would have been like trying to find a zone on stage where I could hear everything. Think about the volumes we played at back then, because we were part of the PA. That being said, every now and then, somebody will go, yeah, man, I remember those Hot Tuna days, the Academy of Music. You'd play Invitation and all this stuff would happen. I go, you will never hear music again like that as long as you live. Because now we have great PAs. We don't need to be that loud, thank God. Right. And it's just different. That's just the deal.
Here's a divergent question. Speed skating. I skate.
Yes.
Have you ever played guitar and skated at the same time?
No.
That sounds dangerous.
Me and Jack getting sort of like involved in all that kind of stuff, I really think it helped save my life down the road in a lot of ways, because it opened other worlds of possibilities to me. I mean, I took it very seriously, and because I got to know people, and my ex-wife was Swedish, I knew a lot of the people on the Swedish Olympic team at that time. Eric Heiden is still a good friend of mine, and all that. I made a lot of friends in that world that we still stay in touch with. 6 or 7 years ago, my daughter wanted to go skating. Oh yeah, I could do that. Great, fine. So I went. I bought a new pair of speed skates, and I realized that even though I could still do it, I no longer had the balance and strength to be able to lean over the way you need to do that kind of stuff. And then, while I was thinking about this, my daughter goes, "Dad, you're going to have to learn how to fall." And as soon as I heard that, I said, "You know something? I don't need to be falling anymore either. I think I'm okay. Okay. We're moving on here."
But you spent years, like in the 70s, actually really working at skating and enjoying it and being...
We got ate up with it for a while. I mean, I'm not sure it was a great career move, but it was a good health move.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, I gave up skiing a couple years ago because I kept like beefing into like trees and stuff, and I was like, this is not going to work out well if I keep doing it.
With that in mind, I'm down here in Florida. One of the things we do up home, because I live in Ohio, we have all these little lakes. I got into that stand-up paddleboarding thing. I'm used to being on lakes. I mean, the only time you have to deal with a wake is some guy goes by on a party boat and makes a wake,
Right.
And I realized that standing up on one of these things on a lake in Ohio is a lot easier than doing it in the Gulf, even if there's almost nothing going on.
Right. Well, speaking of Ohio, tell us about your place. You have like a huge ranch, right? It's like... Yeah, so I lucked into this really beautiful piece of property in Southeast Ohio almost 30 years ago. And around 1995 or 96, my wife and I started talking about the Fur Peach Ranch, so named because it's a fur piece from anywhere. We're a destination, not a waypoint, And we built this place. I mean, if I should have a picture to show you right now, but we have 126 acres. I've got about 30 buildings. I got a theater. I got all kinds of stuff there, And COVID changed everything for us. In the beginning, we were doing lots of in-person classes. We're still doing lots of concerts. I have a local NPR radio show and stuff like that. I really worked on my FM voice so I can introduce bands and stuff like that. Let's hear it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jorma Kaukonen's Fur Peach Ranch. Tonight, we're going to feature Chris Smither with an amazing whatever. But
That's great.
But anyhow, so we have this property and the buildings and all this kind of stuff. I'm not the only one to say this, but I'm going to say it. 2020 was going to be our best year ever, for real. And of course, that's not the way it worked out, but we're okay. Yeah. It's okay. So we're only doing 2 in-person camps this year. And I've been doing lots of stuff, lots of Zoom stuff online. And incidentally, as a guitar player, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. If you were in a room with a group of people and you had a guitar in your hand, would you able to not be able to make noise on it? I can't. No, you can't. It's in your hand. You're going to make noise. Yeah. That's the deal. So one of the great things about the Zoom thing is I can mute all you guys. And so I want to hear you.
Okay, so you can mute the drummer in between songs, so you can announce the next song without him like playing through and all that stuff.
Yes, you could. We could do that. Yes, that's an interesting thought. I have to talk to my drumming friends about that.
There you go.
But anyhow, so teaching classes and all that teaching stuff. I think over the last quarter of a century has really made me a better player in a lot of ways.
Wow.
Wow. And one of the things, like this down here at Sanibel this week, we're doing a 4-day blues thing. I always come up with these goofy titles. The title for this class is Still Got the Blues. But one of the things I'm going to think about when the guys come, is what do blues mean to you? Because there's a lot of different kind of blues. And we'll see if you're going to take a solo word, how would you approach it? I hate all this blues box stuff, I mean, it is true on some level, but it's so limiting as a concept if you're learning. Anyway.
Define when you say blues box. I'm not super familiar with that.
Well, and you can thank your lucky stars. So everybody's got methods, and the only reason I know about these is because as a teacher, somebody goes, well, I saw on YouTube. Let's say you're playing a blues in A and you're looking at that E position chord at the 5th fret. So in that little cluster of 4 frets is every pentatonic blues note you'll ever want. And guys that do this will go, yeah, and you can do this and you can do that, and that kind of sounds right. But if you're playing with a method, then it sounds like somebody's method.
Right.
Did you ever look at the Mickey Baker music books? In the beginning of book 1, Mickey says, as we know, there are thousands of meaningless chords on the guitar. Here are the 28 you will need to know.
That's incredible. Oh, my God.
So, you've spent a lifetime on the road traveling. And you have the camp now. How do you feel about being on the road now? Is that something you still enjoy?
That's for a guy my age, that's an interesting question because I've been on the road all my life, and my dad was in the service. So even when I was a kid, like my daughter's been with the same kids that she's been in school with since she was in kindergarten. That was not my story. So the traveling thing, it's something that's just part of life. There's aspects of it I don't like as much as I used to, but it's just logistical stuff, Like you're in the middle of nowhere and there's only a Dairy Queen where you can get dinner or something like that. But You're going to get dinner at the Dairy Queen. That's going to be the deal.
Yeah, there you go.
For me to be able to maintain the level that I enjoy as a player, it takes a little more work today than it did when I was younger. I need to warm up. I need to do this stuff I need to do in order to make it work. And that's all well and good, but there's nothing like have the pressure of having an audience in front of you other than a family pet or a family member. I think it elevates us as performers to do that, And so I need that. I mean, even if I didn't do it for a living, because I'm not retired, I still do it for a living, I would want to do it for that alone. But the flip side of the coin is that with the pandemic thing, when we were shut down, I'd never spent so much time with my family before. I was not a custodial parent of my son, so I missed out on that with him anyway. But, to actually spend that time and hear my beautiful young daughter be bitchy about stuff and being a teenager and all this stuff, it made her mom crazy, but I kind of enjoyed it.
Right.
People go, do you ever think about retiring? And my answer is always, why? So I can spend more time playing the guitar?
Yeah, exactly. I know a lot of us in our boat, I'm 63, but a lot of people my age are a little upward, like Greg Calby's 72. He's a great mastering engineer, famous. Yeah. But I don't see him slowing down because he's still at the top of his game and and making great records. And it's why would you stop to just maybe play golf 3 times a week and kind of.
The other thing too is for guys like us that are in the arts, we're so fortunate. My dad worked in the government service, And when he was forced to retire in his early 60s, he loved it. Some guys hate it. They just can't wait to retire. But he could no longer do what he loved to do.
Yeah.
It's not like some club where you can pretend to be a government bureaucrat that you like to do. You know, you just can't do that.
Yeah.
We get to do it until we can't do it.
Yeah, that's my absolutely. I'll get to do it until people don't want me to do it.
Yeah, no, you're right. And even if they don't want you to do it, heck with that.
I still do it. I'll find someone who wants me to do it. But also, we talked about the ranch, but when do you anticipate opening it back up again? Because obviously,
so we've been open, but we have 2 on-site classes, and I should have these dates burned into my brain, but I don't. We've got 2 on-site classes coming up in October and November, and it's a work in progress. So I'm not going to say we're never going to do more on-site classes because we enjoy doing it. That being said, if you're thinking about what it takes to run an organization like ours. We employ about 12 people. We have a commercial kitchen. We have a lot of stuff. And my wife, who's younger than me, but who just turned 60, it's really her business. She does all the heavy lifting.
Great.
And she works 15-hour days. And I've said this to her for years, but now she's going, I don't know if I want to work that much. And I go, I hear you. So we'll see. We're doing some off-site stuff. We're going to be up at Martha's Vineyard next year. I've got a friend that's got a place up there.
Oh, wow.
I think we're going to take a bunch of immigrants with us and teach them to play the guitar.
There you go. I wonder where you'll get them shipped from.
Who knows?
Yikes.
What a time.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So, Jorma, we got your book, which, by the way, is fantastic. Been so long. I was going through it, and I got to the part of you in Germany in like 1980.
Yeah.
You got detained trying to leave. And that was pretty fucking intense. Like
it was intense, So I got detained, and I've spent 2 nights in a German jail. And so crazy. The cell that we were in, there was like 12 people in this cell. I've never been to prison, but I've been in jail. And the difference between rights and privileges becomes immediately apparent when that happens. But anyway, there were only 3 foreigners there. There were 2 guys from Austria and myself. And the guys from Austria were like, who knows? They were genuinely bad people. But because our bond was we were foreigners, and so they protected me, which was a good thing.
But for anyone who picks up this book, the one thing I'd really read the book, but also read the lyrics in the back, because they're super beautiful.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. One of the things that pointed out to me after the book came out, that the one set of lyrics that is not in the book is the "Been So Long" lyrics. What's up with that?
Wow. Really? How did that happen? Wow.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Brain fart, senior moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
See. Well, next edition.
Yeah, exactly.
Jorma, this is like such a thrill for me for Johnny and I and Tony.
Yeah. I remember just being like 10 years old in my house and Anthony playing the records and me just starting to discover the music that shaped my life for the rest of my life. So I kudos to you. Thank you for everything. And I will say, the look on my brother's face when you popped on, I haven't seen him smile like that in a really fucking long time. So,
well, I'm not being disingenuous when I say this, but when you say that, that's an incredible honor for somebody like me. You don't plan that stuff,
Right.
It's just if the ducks get into the row and you're lucky, then that happens. So I'm honored and I appreciate that. And your brother and I have known each other for a long time. We sort of reconnected at a Film Friends gig, and I got to tell you that Eventide stuff. I just wish I could wrap I'm a little bit dyslexic. If somebody shows me how to do things, I'm horrible with manuals. I really need to sit with somebody to do it. But some of that stuff these guys come up with is, how can you even think of this shit,
The one thing I will say about the guys at Eventide, and they've got a magical thing, because a lot of these design guys and developers and stuff, they're all musicians.
Obviously.
Yeah. But that's why that shit works so good, and that's why it's so intuitive. So Black Hole is a favorite for me. And
it's really awesome. And, we joke about this. We think about when we recorded the first Airplane album, which is Takes Off, which is a folk rock album, 3 tracks, so you could ping pong. And you couldn't do it more than once because there's no Dolby back then. Right. The stereostic pillow, big deal. 4 tracks, still no Dolby. You had to nail your parts and stuff like that. And then people talk about what on the Embryonic Journey track, which is drenched in room echo. You know, shooting it up to the room in the attic, the whole deal, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, that's a sound for sure. But to get back to this black hole thing, the stuff we can do with it is ridiculous. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Jorma, the best, man.
Yeah, fellas.
For more on Jorma's music, career, and night in a German jail, check out his autobiography, Been So Long, available wherever books are sold. For links, playlists, and extras for all our interviews, visit gearclubpodcast.com. Follow us on social media at Gear Club Podcast, and be sure to sign up for our mailing list for the latest news and episodes.
For extras from the episodes, like playlists, links, and videos, head over to gearclubpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and come say hi and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gear Club Podcast. Thanks for listening.
And please, if you like what you hear, let us know and leave a review.